Well, Guten Morgen. Geht's Ihnen? I'm practicing my German. So, just a couple public service announcements. Bob Paul is taking pictures if you want to renew your picture for the picture board. And people who are affirming their baptism and becoming mission partners today at SLC. We've got a group of those folks in the late service. He's available in the right as you go outside this door to the left, then a right into the library, right there. So I wanted to just make that announcement, but also anyone who wants to update their picture can do that. So Bob's here doing that today. All right, so how many people were here yesterday? No shame, regardless one way or the other? Okay, yeah, about half or so. So just a quick introduction of John here, and also a reiteration of why we're doing what we're doing. So when I was pondering my sabbatical, and as some of you know, I put it off a couple summers or a summer. Jonathan did his last summer because I was trying for a Lilly grant, and we were, as a congregation, blessed to receive the Lilly Congregational Renewal grant, which is not an easy thing to get, but it was a real blessing to get that. And so the title of my grant application and my sabbatical plan is Long-Term Pastor Booster and Church Size Barrier Buster. I think the Lilly folks liked it because we got the grant. But it says exactly what I'm working on. I've come to believe in the helpfulness of long-term pastorates. It's partly been, this is only my second parish, so, but I've also seen how a long-term pastorate can be a great blessing, but if you go stale, none. So you can kind of go one way or the other, and so this sabbatical is designed to certainly give me new energy. You know I need new energy. I don't have enough of that. And so, but this sabbatical is designed to help, push us off into ministry together for many more years and kind of revitalize me, no question about that. But also I wanted it to be about SLC and our ministry. And I think we've grown amazingly over the last 9-10 years. Our natural church development scores, when we use that tool, in every category except for one, we are in the top 15% of churches. And when they give me the report, they say churches that are doing this well typically are growing steadily 5%, 10% every year. Well, we're not numerically. And so I thought, we need to just take a look in the mirror and ask ourselves some important questions. And so when part of the grant was to have a church consultant come in, I went looking for someone. I found John Wimberly, who's worked for the Alban Institute in the past, has got incredible experience working with congregations in systems, their systems, and in size theory. He works very closely with someone, Susan Beaumont, who's written a book on the church size stuff. And so I just thought he would be the perfect person to come in and help us have this conversation and think about some things and do some teaching and again, help us with some discernment. And it's been a great weekend with the staff, with the council and leadership on Saturday, and then last night with some presentation and conversation. So I know it's going to be engaging and interesting what he's going to share with us today. And without further ado, let's roll. John, welcome.
Thank you. So yesterday I said that I was considering myself a 24-hour expert on youth. That's how long I've been here, and now I'm a 40-hour expert. And one of the things that I learned today is you have a very animated preacher. Lordy, do you have an animated preacher. I was exhausted by the end of this.
You should have seen last week.
But just to build on what Bill was saying is you have really great worship, you've got good programs, you've got a great staff, you've got a beautiful facility and campus here. So you really do have all the things that typically would produce growth, numerical growth. And that's not happening. And that's just a phenomenon that needs to be explored. And that's what we've been doing this weekend. And I can only come to one conclusion, and that is that there are some built-in growth inhibitors that say to the system as a whole, we're big enough. We like it the way it is. We don't really want to get any bigger. And how that works in terms of discouraging people from joining the church, I mean, it's all kind of mysterious and spooky, but it's true. I mean, this stuff happens. And I'll show you some slides about where plateaus happen in various sized congregations. That kind of demonstrates that, because you're not alone. I mean, you're not the only congregation that develops these inhibitors. So in the prayer this morning, which, I mean, I'm one of those Presbyterians that Bill was joking about. And by the way, I'm a contentious Presbyterian. So this is the prayer. Messiah Jesus, your followers establish churches and communities near and far. Take us outside of ourselves. Take us outside of ourselves and teach us to give away what you have given us. Show us how to witness to your presence in places near and far. In your name we pray. Amen. I mean, that is just such a well-written prayer, because one of the reasons I am so committed to growth, and yes, I'm committed to numerical growth, as well as all the other forms of growth that take place in a congregation, is that when you commit yourself to grow a church, you can't think about what satisfies you. It takes you outside of yourself, and you have to imagine, okay, there's all of these literally hundreds of thousands of people outside this church, and some of them need a spiritual life really badly, and some of them are looking for a spiritual life kind of desperately. And what do we need to do? What changes do we need to make, small or large, that would allow God to lead them here and ultimately lead them to the seats that you're in right now, so that they would become brothers and sisters in Christ. So that is, when you don't have a growth focus in terms of the numbers, frankly, when you don't have that kind of focus, what are you concerned about? You're concerned about yourself and your own life. And as those of you who've been through listening to me now for 40-some hours, only my family should have to do that, actually. And they don't really want to do it. But at any rate, know that I use a lot of business imagery and analogies. And I mean, just think about what would happen to a company, or for that matter, a nonprofit, if it only thought about its own institutional life instead of the market that it was seeking to serve and sell their goods and services. Or if it's a nonprofit, just serve, period. So I'll tell you what happened. They would die. And the image I used yesterday was General Motors, which back in the 50s was very content to be General Motors, right? And what happened to them? They were on a plateau. They stayed on a plateau, and then all of a sudden they came crashing off the plateau. And it happens to churches all the time. Usually the churches that hire me are ones that are crashing off of that plateau. And doing something at that point is extremely difficult. Doing something where you are now, which is an incredibly good spot, is a much easier task if people will put their mind to it. So yesterday somebody said, and actually it's been said several times throughout my time here, somebody said, well, I like the fact that I know everybody in the church. Okay? You may feel like you know everybody in the church. You do not know everybody in the church. And that's actually a really important thing to get straight, because, I mean, the fear is, if we grow, I won't know everybody in the church. So there's this thing called the Dunbar effect, which is in Susan Beaumont's book, is about as well established a piece of social research as there is. And it's just been documented over and over, and people have worked on it, refined it, other scholars. It was originally by this guy named Dunbar. And the basic premise behind it is that from a cognitive brain function, I'm not talking now just kind of psychology, I'm talking brain functions, kind of medical brain functions. You can only have a relationship with 150 people. That's max. You cannot have more. Now, you can have all kinds of friendships, etc., but in terms of saying we know somebody. So what Dunbar came up with was that for decision making, the maximum number of people where it's really effective for making a decision is 7, which, by the way, is the optimum size for a team. A team typically is 5 to 7 people, and one of the reasons that those numbers are important is that when you get larger than 5 to 7, the team's ability to make decisions and become effective starts to diminish. And in fact, there's another effect that I can't remember the name of. I should know because I put it in the book I wrote on teams. But I'm not teaching on that this weekend, so I can forget that. But at any rate, there's another effect, and the effect is, what they've studied is that as you start, what they go to the military or a corporation where some manager goes, we're behind schedule, we need to add people to the team to make sure we hit the schedule here. And what they find is the more people they add, actually it lengthens the time of completion rather than shortens it. They would have been better off staying with the original 7 and just making them function better rather than trying to add people power. So 7 is for decision making. We can only care and support, really care and support, for approximately 15 people. All right? That kind of taps us out psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, everything else. And I'm talking about the type of caring you would do, if your spouse was ill. That would be just really serious, heavy-duty, emotional, and physical caring. A family or a clan, those kinds of relationships, they max out at about 75. So a big Irish family, with lots of aunts and uncles and cousins and all that kind of stuff. When it gets to 75, then the people beyond the 75 fade into the woodwork. And for a community like this, basically it's 150. And these numbers are why the megachurches have been successful. They understand this stuff, they study this stuff, and they implement this stuff. And that's why they've gone to small groups, because you can create intimacy so people feel like there's an intimate environment with a smaller number. It's not going to be 150, it's going to be one of those 15 size groups. And you create your intimacy that way. So, if this church were to grow, right now you're averaging 390, if you were to grow to 450, you would not know, literally, not know less people than you know now. What's wonderful is that you've created here the feeling that you know everybody, even though you don't. That's what you don't want to lose. And that's actually a doable thing. You can, with good leadership, particularly from your pastoral staff, you can create an environment in which everybody thinks they know everybody, and everybody thinks they've got a personal relationship with the pastor. They probably don't, except in times of real crisis, as the church gets bigger, but they think they do. And that is really, somebody mentioned perception is reality yesterday, and this is one of those places where perception is reality. If you think you've got this kind of one-on-one relationship with the pastor, then you're in really good shape. And one of the things I've noticed about Bill's really good with names. I'm terrible with names. So I got really good at faking that I knew everybody's name in my church. That was just an absolute necessity to survive. So do we want to grow? And what I put up here are just a whole bunch, and I don't have to go through them all, but there are a whole bunch of citations from Acts of the Apostle, like you read this morning, where it talks about the growth of the early church. And they do not talk generically about growth. They don't talk about deepening their spiritual lives. They talk about numbers. It's numerical growth. So in the first one, and there were added that day about 3,000 souls. The second one, and more than ever, believers were added to the Lord, multitudes, numbers, both of women and men, etc., etc. So it's interesting to me that we've developed this thing, almost a phobia about numbers, when the early church certainly did not have that phobia. The early church was extremely proud of the numbers and that they were growing. So I think it's hard for us to ignore this part of our tradition. So this is a wonderful quote from a colleague of mine. I'm going to read it. If we aspire to grow and it doesn't work, that's a clue to our future path. But if we don't aspire to grow, it won't happen. And there's a significant research that says that not every church that intends to grow will grow, but it's also true that churches that don't intend to grow won't. It's hard work making room for more people, and if we feel that in our community there's a need for the religious values that the church represents, and that the tradition has something of real value to offer to those who are ready at any given moment to say yes, it means that we must have a vocation to make room for more people. And that's what we're doing. We're literally making room. You're going to have to make room in a pew for someone to sit there. If you're in a class, you're going to have to make room physically for that person to sit there in that class. And that's the thing, that's one of these what I call unconscious inhibitors that I think is going on here, which is there's kind of a reluctance to make room for other people, in part because why? We like it exactly the way it is. So why, it'd be like if you had a house that you thought was perfect, why would you build an addition to it? Because this isn't our house. This is God's house. And so the kind of the lay of the land here is very different from our own personal property. And we have a responsibility to grow this house. And it's as biblical a mandate as there's any mandate that you're going to find. So this is the slide I was talking about. These are the sizes of churches that I mentioned yesterday. And for those of you who weren't here, we focus on worship attendance, not membership, because congregations are not honest about how many members they have. So, and sometimes they're not honest about attendance either, but they're usually pretty honest about attendance. It's hard to waffle on that one. And so what we do is, over the years, we've learned that when we're evaluating a congregation, we don't ask what's the size of your membership. We ask what's the size of your, how many people are coming to worship. And we come up with, in this case I've given you 4, there's actually more that get even bigger than these. But the family church, the pastoral church, multi-cell church, which is what you are currently, and the professional church, which is what you're just about to become if you added even 10 people in worship on an average to your membership. So as you can see, the multi-cell plateau is somewhere between 350 and 400, and where are you at 390? So you are on this plateau. And what we've learned through research and experience is that unless you have an intentional strategy to get off that plateau, you will remain on that plateau for a while. And then, unless you have an intentional strategy to grow, you will begin to decline in membership. I mean, those are just kind of facts of life in the church, in the United States of America, in the 21st century, and actually in the 20th century, where a lot of this information was learned. So we had this multi-cell plateau, and people are going to join this size of a congregation because they are connected in various and sundry ways to smaller groups. That's why we call it multi-cell. So a cell would be a men's group, or a women's group, or a choir, or a youth group, or a parents group, or a softball team. It doesn't make that much difference, but it consists of all these cells, and the quality of the relationships in those cells is why we have a feeling that we know everybody in the church, because we really know the people in our cell, this group of 15 to 25 people. And that carries over, just kind of a good vibe carries over when we're here in worship, and even though we may not know everybody, we see those people, and that makes us feel like we know everybody really well. And newcomers will fade away from the church if they are not connected into a cell. And so one of the strategies that I know I'm going to recommend to you is that you need to be creating new cells. It's not even programs. I mean, there's basically small groups, opportunities for people to get together. It might be to go and do a mission project, a Habitat for Humanity. It might be a new Bible study. It might be people going out to dinner together. I mean, there's all kinds of options, and you don't have to reinvent a wheel on this. You can just look at what other churches are doing and say, oh, they're having success with that. That's something we don't have here. Let's try it here and see what happens. Some of these will work. Some of these will fail. That's just the name of the game in being the church. It's trial and error, but that's something that needs to take place. And another key, absolutely key indicator that you're on a plateau is that the members are ambivalent about growth. And you all are, the reason you bring in somebody from outside is because I can see stuff that you can't see anymore. I used to tell new members at Western Church, where I was a pastor for 30 years, I said, in the first year I really need for you to tell me what you see, because I can't see it anymore. If you see something strange or weird, tell me, because I don't see it. And I said, and here's the deal, in a year you won't either, because you'll become part of the system. You know, it's like we all know families who, you know, they go, we have a really loving family, we really get along, and you're going, really? You know, because, you're an outsider looking at that family, and all you see is discord and conflict. So it's a similar kind of thing with a church family, which is an outsider. So what I'm telling you is, you are really ambivalent about growth. A lot of people have actually been honest about that. It's sometimes hard for me to get people to express their ambivalence or even downright opposition to growing. You haven't been reluctant in that way. You're not a shy group. You have expressed the ambivalence, and you've expressed some opposition. It's manifesting itself around this issue of numbers, frankly, where people are saying, well, I think we should grow, but I don't want to be numeric. I don't want this whole thing driven by numerical stuff. You know, fine. We won't just do that. But as I said, looked in those passages from Acts, numerical stuff matters. And one of the things that can get really frustrating in a church is when you can't measure anything. So I do a lot of strategic planning with congregations, and one of the things that I insist is that they create a performance measure and a timeline for every strategy. And so they'll have a strategy that we're going to help our members deepen their spiritual lives. And then they want to move on to the next strategy. And I go, well, how are you going to judge that you accomplished that? What's your performance measure? Well, that's like, we don't know. And I said, well, then you'll never know if you did. So, then we just have to sit there and have a discussion until we figure out some numerical ways, more people participating in Bible studies, more people picking up the daily devotionals that some churches put out in the narthex. I mean, they start coming up with numerical ways of evaluating whether or not members are growing. And we can do it. Other churches are doing it. There's just no reason we can't. But this whole discussion around numbers is part of the ambivalence. There are a lot of what I would call passive barriers, for lack of a better term, about why a church gets stalled. One is that they're not staffed for growth. I think I wouldn't go so far as to say seriously understaffed, but you're understaffed. And you've also got a problem in that typically a congregation that has 390 people in worship is going to have a budget of roughly $1 million. Your budget is roughly $600,000. Okay, that's a very significant gap between the number of people in worship and the amount of money that you've got in terms of resources. And so a strategy that's going to have to be developed is how do we increase our financial resources, because you can't hire more staff if you can't pay them. And that staff are expensive. It's just an expensive thing. But you need more staff in order to get over this edge. My guess is probably it's not totally a guess, I'm pretty sure I'm right, that one of the reasons you're not growing is your staff can't do anymore. They're actually already working more. You're going to burn people out here at this level of number of people in the congregation who are active in worship, and with the size staff you got. You're going to burn folks out, and then you're going to be very unhappy when they leave. and you're going to go, you know, we burned them out. So, so there's a staff size issue that accompanies growth, and the budget isn't right for the current size, which I already mentioned. Your infrastructure is great. You know, you don't have. I mean, sometimes I'll come in and they'll have a small sanctuary, and there's an interesting little church growth statistic that I learned probably 40 some years ago that is so true, which is when people come into a sanctuary, if it's less than half full, they go, I wonder why there aren't more people here. If they come into a sanctuary and it's 75% full, they go, I wonder if there's any room for me here. You know, it seems like there's so many people here. I wonder if there's any. So there's like a 25% sweet spot between 50% full and 75% full. And everything on either side of it is problematic in one way or another. It's a really, and it's true. I mean, it's absolutely true. I experienced it in my own congregation where I served for 30 years. I'd rather have the problem with the 75% full than under 50%, I'll tell you that right now. But there are not enough small groups as entry points. That's a big deal. And then there also a reason people don't grow. And this would be, and we haven't talked about this, but if you have a lot of visitors, and I don't know if you do because we haven't really talked about that, but that's something you need to analyze. If you have a lot of visitors, but they're not joining, then there's a couple of things that may be at work. And one of them has to do with symbolic message, what I call symbolic messaging of values. And the story I told the other day was about this big church, big Presbyterian church down in North Carolina that I was working with. And again, I'm an outsider and I can see some stuff that people don't see. So I go to worship, and it's this huge cathedral of a church. It's very narrow and very long. And the thing holds a couple of thousand people. They have about 1,500 people in worship. So they need all these elders to serve the communion. So when it comes time for the communion part of the service, all of these elders march in together. And after the worship service, I said to the leaders, I said, so is there something in the instructions for serving communion that says you have to wear business attire? And they said, well, no, why would you say that? I said, because you all have business attire on. We do? You know, and they started looking, and that's true, we do. You know, and it was, they didn't know it, but there was obviously a clear understanding that if you were going to serve communion, you did that. And once I saw that, I realized we had done the same thing at the church I served. I finally got our ushers to wear jeans. They were coming to church in jeans, but when they ushered, they'd look pretty much more like I'm dressed right now. And that's a message, like all those people in business, men and women in business attire. It was a message to visitors that we're a very formal kind of, I won't go so far as to say uptight Presbyterian church, but I was verging on that, you know. And they were having trouble attracting younger people to that service. They were actually getting lots of younger people at their contemporary worship service, and then they started a Twitter worship service that I told folks about the other day that is really growing. So, but the point is that one of the things you need to do, that we all need to do, is, particularly leaders in the congregation, is imagine what your worship service looks like to people who've never been here. Because it looks just right to you. You joined the church. You're still here. You know, you love it. But there are messages that are given out in the context of a worship service. And, I mean, today, you said the Nicene Creed. There are very few churches that will still say the Nicene Creed. That's a big message. It's a message you want to give. That's quite clear. But you want to think about how's that perceived, and are there other messages that we want to give as well that, by the way, you don't have to believe everything in the Nicene Creed, because probably everybody in the congregation doesn't believe everything in the Nicene Creed. So how do you get that message across to somebody who comes and worships for the first time?
And most of the time we do the Apostles' Creed, but it's Easter
Right, I understand.
season, and that's why we're doing the
Yeah, but even the Apostles' Creed, I mean, I learned
Do
about
that
this because
every week.
our target demographic were people who were unchurched. And so I'm standing up there in front, and because I know those creeds by heart, I'm looking at the congregation as I'm saying it, and what I'm seeing is nobody's saying it who's a visitor. You know, some of them aren't even singing the hymns. They're definitely not saying the creeds. Because particularly young people will not say stuff they don't believe. So you ask them to read something, and you know, my generation, I guess I'm supposed to read it. We read it, you know, and just kind of in a robotic fashion. But the millennials in particular, I mean, they just won't. Most of them won't do that. They will not come in and just read something because it's there. So again, looking through the lens of people who are not members of this church, rather than through the lens just of it. It's a both and, rather than just through the lens of people who love this church, is an essential thing to do to grow a church. And it pulls us outside of ourselves, so that we, in exactly the way that prayer talked about. So to get off the plateau, what do we need to do? The first thing you need to do is to make growth an explicit and intentional goal. I'm a big believer in purpose, and we talked a lot about this yesterday, particularly at your leadership retreat. And there's a reason that Rick Warren's book about a purpose-driven church and a purpose-driven life have sold a bazillion copies. And it's because he's onto something there, which is when you have a purpose, life feels pretty good. And when you don't have a purpose, life doesn't feel so good. You're just kind of drifting around, floating, wondering what you should do next. And it's the same thing that's true with a congregation. And what happens in a congregation like this one, which is a very healthy, happy congregation, is the purpose kind of becomes keeping things the way they are. All right? And that actually is that's not a sufficient purpose to sustain a church over an extended period of time. It just won't. That's a maintenance agenda rather than a purpose agenda. And so one of the things that I think your leaders are going to do, I certainly hope so, is sit down and create a purpose statement of some type in which you say, this is our purpose for the next 3 years. All right? And then they'll set up some goals and some strategies to make that happen. And because unless there is a purpose-driven thing going on in the organization, you will drift on that plateau until all of a sudden you find yourself sliding off the plateau. Because remember, there's only 2 ways to get off a plateau. You either go up or you go down. And that's true of worship attendance as well. You either go up or you go down. Staying on I'm amazed you've stayed on this plateau as long as you have, to be honest. I mean, you've been on it for a long time, which makes me think you could probably stay on it another 5 years. But if you do that, the longer you stay on it, the riskier the thing is becoming. You're going to have to make an additional investment in staff in order to grow, to continue to grow. I guess I would argue you need to make an additional investment in staff even to maintain at this point, because you will burn your staff out. The congregation in a church that will grow to the next size, what they call a professional church. The reason they call it a professional church is that increasingly a lot of the functions that used to be done by lay people get done by staff people, by the professionals that you hire to do them. And one of the things that happens in that church is that you have to accept a staff situation in which you do not have as much direct access to a pastor, to the head of staff pastor, as you did in the past. You're going to have, excuse me, you're going to have access to pastors, and knowing Bill the way I do now, you're going to have access to him in cases of emergency. There's no question about that. But in terms of just on a daily basis, to drop in the office and say hello stuff, as you grow, life gets too busy and agendas get too full to have the drop in the church stuff happen in the way that it's done in the past. That's a big thing to give up psychologically. I actually don't think it's a big thing really. Because, I mean, how many times do we actually do that? We actually go, well, I'm driving by the church, I'll just pull in the parking lot and run into Bill's office. You know, I mean, does that happen all the time?
No.
Okay, I didn't think so. I mean, it usually doesn't. But as soon as I suggest, you're not going to have access to bill as much as you did in the past. Well, wait a minute. I drive by, you start thinking that you did it, and you really don't. So the governing board hands management over to staff, which they've already done in some very significant ways here anyways, because you couldn't be at the side. And the governing board focuses more on strategic direction, which is what a good governing board should be doing anyways, because a governing board doesn't know how to manage an operation like that. It just doesn't. And then you need to develop ways to avoid what I call the anonymity factor and keep your members engaged. And the primary way for that are with increasing the number of cells with which people identify. So this is, as I was doing trying to come up with some additional research, because I've had to speak for a long time while I've been here. I mean, you guys got your money's worth on this one. Bill really, I was in circle. I'm flying out here going, I got like 5 hours on Saturday, 2 hours with the staff on Friday, and then Saturday night, and Sunday morning. So at any rate, and it's all been good. I'm not complaining. It's all been good. But I'm just saying, this has been a full thing. So I had to dig a little deeper on this particular subject than I normally do. So one of the things I found was this chart, which I kind of made up some of the key things. It was actually not a chart like this, but the concepts were in an article I read. It was really good. And it was about what happens as a church moves from a new church development, which is on the left-hand side, over to an established congregation like your own. And what happens in a new church development is, initially, the job of the pastor is to find and keep people. In other words, develop a core of people who can become a worshiping community, which is the third stage in a new church development. You don't just usually start a worship service, because nobody will probably come. What you do is you go out and you find a nucleus of people who will come, so that when you have your first worship service, there's some people and some energy around it. So the finding, keeping, and worshiping are really high energy, very exciting times in the life of the church. And then, where the blue line is, you move into a different stage in which what you're doing is you're educating people, you're doing pastoral care, and you're doing overseeing, which is really about programs. You're creating youth programs and all kinds of things like that. So that's the stuff that happens over here once we actually get developed. And what the article was pointing out that is absolutely in sync with my experience, both in terms of my own, because my own church it was basically like a new church development, and we went through these stages. And that is, once you cross that blue line, you start to hire staff for the functions on the right-hand side. So you'll hire a Christian educator, you'll hire a youth minister, you'll hire a music director. So it's all stuff on the right side, and you almost forget about the stuff on the left side, which is evangelism, church growth, finding, keeping, worshiping. Churches that grow tend to hire people on the left-hand side as well as the right-hand side. Okay. So an example I use is a church I'm working with down in south of Oakland, and the church, it's a UCC church, and they're located in a community that's about 80% Mexican-American. And the congregation is basically an Anglo congregation. And so they're going to hire and the pastor, she speaks worse Spanish than she thinks. I speak a little bit of Spanish, and her Spanish is not good. But she speaks a little bit of Spanish, but not enough to start a worship service. I guarantee you that. And so what they're going to do is they're going to hire somebody who's Spanish speaking from one of the seminaries around that Pacific consortium down in the Bay Area, and have that person come in. So that's hiring on the left side of that thing, to build a new worshiping community, and they're going to see how that goes. You have no idea. These things are risky. But the point is that that's an outward orientation. We're trying to find, we're trying to keep, and we're worshiping. That's an outward orientation. Churches move into the right side, and it's an inward orientation. And if you take nothing else away from what I'm saying, inward and outward are the two words that we need to think about. And to the extent that, the early church was outward, it was driven. I mean, I was watching Bill's animated sermon, and he was doing this thing, point, and that was exactly right. It matched his physical stuff was matching the lesson in Acts of the Apostles. So, and that's what we need to be. We need to be more outwardly oriented if we're going to resemble the church. So this is another quad that I found that's kind of interesting. So on the left-hand side, you've got management, strong management, weak management. At the top, you've got strong vision and weak vision. And just for the sake of conversation now, since I've introduced the concept of purpose, let's replace strong word vision with sense of purpose. So strong sense of purpose and weak sense of purpose. Okay? And what happens is if you've got a strong vision and strong management, you will grow. If you have weak vision and weak management, you will decline, obviously. If you have strong vision and weak management, strong sense of purpose, but weak management, you'll have limited growth, maybe no growth. That could also be a plateau too. And then up on the right, where you have strong management, but you have a weak sense of purpose, that's a plateau. And a weak is too strong a word for you all, but I would put not clear. Okay, not clear sense of purpose. And you've got an outstanding staff and lay leaders, so you've got excellent management. So you are on, in terms of that kind of a grid presentation. And this stuff, by the way, works, it comes out of the corporate world. That's where people take this stuff. Because organizations are organizations, whether they're a corporation, a nonprofit, or a church, or a synagogue. And there's just so many similar behaviors. A lot of people resist that, but they do. So what I'd like to do now, because this is your Hamlet type question here. He didn't know whether he should be or not. You've got to come to a question of, do you want to grow or not? And if you don't, I'm not going to judge that. I certainly not going to judge that. That's not my job in life. That's God's job. But I will. You just need, and you will continue on the plateau. Is what you'll do, and you'll burn out staff. But if you need to make this decision. Your leaders can't make this for you. First of all, they've got their own ambivalence about it, as I experienced yesterday in meeting with them. And second of all, they're friends with you. This is one of the reasons that change is so hard in a church, is they're friends with you, they like you, they want you to like them, and so they're not going to introduce an agenda that they think you're going to react negatively to. I think there are a group of leaders who are, in fact, I know there are a group of leaders who are savvy enough to know everybody's not going to like whatever they do. But they would like for there to be a consensus of people, I'm sure, that we're going to move in this direction. So what I'd like to do is take around tables, let's take 10 minutes. And if you're not at a table, you can form a circle, or you can come up to one of the tables that isn't full. Preferably, you'd have 6 or 7 people around each table. And have a discussion about, do you think this church should grow numerically? We're just going to stick with numerically. We can also have another conversation at another time about, if you say, no, we don't want to grow numerically, then you can change the conversation. Do you want to grow in some other way? And then have that. But first, let's get off the dime on this thing about numerical. All right? So everybody form up into groups. 10 minutes of conversation. I'll blow the whistle. And we'll see what's going on.
I know it's going to be hard to disengage from your small group.
Disengage you must.
Disengage you must.
Okay, so here's what I'd like us to do. We'll go around and I'm going to ask each group. We don't have time for every group, but I'm going to ask each group. You think growth is possible? And here's what I'd like. I don't want something that you said, but if there's somebody in your group, like if there's somebody over at this table, who who heard something, not something they said, but heard something that somebody else said about whether we should grow or not that really made sense, share that. So we'll start over here. Did you get to the assignment?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Well, we had a pretty interesting discussion with everything from radical Islam, which they do a very good job of recruiting, to something I shared with the group right toward the end, so I'll share a little bit with that, is that yesterday we saw a slide that said that 71% of the population believe in nothing in particular. And that should be a good target zone for growth. And then in the different generations, you got the builders, the boomers, the millennials, which I can't remember the age group of the millennials, the years, but that is the group that seems to be the most hungry to be targeted. But the millennials are also the group that's furthest in debt, financially. So obviously to grow in that area for our church would be wonderful, perhaps in the way of time and talents, but maybe not so much financially. So I think personally, I think for our congregation to grow would be wonderful. We have the space to do it, we have the campus to do it, we have a wonderful staff. I think for us to consider to go to this next leap in budget, and I say this maybe because I was a treasurer here for 3 years, so I know a little bit about our budget. I think for us to go from our current $680,000 budget to this next plateau of $1 million is asking this current congregation quite a bit.
Okay.
So that's kind of my thought on that. But growth, wonderful. We have the campus to do it.
So the 71% is, there was a Pew poll, and it talked about the rise of people who are unaffiliated. 71% of people who are unaffiliated stated that they believed in nothing in particular. Okay. They were given the option of atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular. And 71% said nothing in particular. It's not the population as a whole. 74% of Americans self-identify as Christians. I mean, in Europe, it'd be 10, 15% probably. So, I mean, we're still pretty high. So, go to another table back there and ask somebody to talk about what they heard somebody else say that struck a chord.
Oh, yes, well, in our group, we talked about a lot of different ideas, but as far as growth would also be great. No one here was opposed to growth. We had ideas from adding different services, or Saturday night service, or late Sunday service, just depending on how the growth is done and what areas are we actually growing in. So it's more of, if it's a slow growth, was also the sense I was getting. It seems like, and it should be, it would be a lot more palatable than just all of a sudden looking up and trying to have another 100 or 200 people to accommodate.
Right. Okay.
Growth itself, yes, it was a very positive response to that.
Okay. Another table? Somebody want to say something from their table? Here we go.
Oh, Julie, Wade's got one. Okay, go ahead.
Our area, we did an informal poll, so I would encourage everybody here, you don't have to do it, but the vote is, do you want our church to grow? You're not so sure sideways, or you're against growth. So I'm asking everybody to vote with your thumb, and let's just get a quick informal poll. How do we feel about growth here at Silverdale Lutheran? So ready? You're for growth, you're not so sure sideways, or you're against growth.
Looks like pretty strong for. Okay, that's good. Yeah. Here and then down here.
Well, yeah, just to quickly answer the question, this table was in support of numerical growth as well.
Great.
I moved from being ambivalent 24 hours ago to, I heard something coming in, and it was really based on conversations that you hear about what we love about this church and this congregation. And when you look at that list of things that we love, what we heard coming in this morning is it's not a gift until you give it away. And if we have all these wonderful things and we're holding back of sharing that with the community, and irrespective of what group we're targeting, I think that's an important element. The other thing I want to build on what Rick said, and part of it is still kind of rolling in my head, kind of confused, I guess. I thought I heard you say in order to get to the next plateau, our budget would have to grow as well. And then I saw a bullet that says, for right now, that budget is pretty good for our current size.
Right.
And I'm going, wow, I think, as you heard me say before, I thought we were pretty healthy financially.
Right.
And in order to grow, I'm kind of with Rick in that area. When you look strictly at numbers, I'm a believer from an organizational standpoint that whether it's 100 people, 10 people, or 1,000 people, that division is going to be the same.
Right.
You're going to have a certain group of people that are going to want to lead and have the vision to take the organization in a particular direction. You have a group of people that are going to follow those leaders, and then you have a group that are pretty ambivalent.
Right.
Just one.
So you're not gonna, I think I created a wrong, but you're not gonna get to 1 million instantly. That's a 50% increase in your budget. That's not happening. So, but if you increased it by 100,000, that would enable you to add another staff person. Or if you increased it by 50,000, you could add, take one of your half-time people and make them full-time. So, I mean, let's think incrementally rather than the whole thing. Over here.
Okay, well, what we had come up with, we all pretty much as a group, you're like, Del? Sorry.
I hear you. Keep going.
We came up with yes, we want to grow, need to grow. What struck me was hearing both of my kids are millennials. They walk into the church and they don't like it and they're not coming back because of the structure, I guess. So that's what we were wondering about. We spoke about the growth being slow, just maybe 10 a year. And would that really stretch us that would make our budget, potentially we could work that to go a little slower than trying to get it all right now, as you just said.
So I would argue that the reason that I mean, not every millennial is going to like this church. I mean, so what? I mean, not every non-millennial does either. But what I would argue is that you don't have any intentional strategy right now in terms of thinking how you make your worship and the whole Sunday morning experience millennial friendly.
Right.
And there actually are congregations that are doing that are attracting and keeping millennials. So if that's part of your growth strategy, then I think you could see that. Now that would that's what the presupposition is, that there are millennials living around here, which I assume there are. So we do have to stop now, in large part because if I don't get the rental car back to the airport, you get charged another $80. Right? So, I just want to say this has been so much fun. I've been calling my wife. I mean, it's a little hard because this 3-hour time gap thing really changes the dynamics. But anyway, and just telling her what a great group of people you are and what a great congregation this is. And I just hope I've made it clear that you don't have a problem in the sense that you're a very healthy congregation. I'm pretty good at diagnosing congregations. This is a really good congregation. If you were coming to me as an annual physical, I would say, you pass, everything's healthy. But in terms of preventative stuff going forward, where my doctor gives me cholesterol stuff, just in case, this growth thing fits into the preventative thing. If you want to retain the health that you currently have, the growth strategy has to be created. And so thank you for giving me the chance to experience it, all of you, and to experience, I've never been in this part of the country, and obviously it's gorgeous too. And the Moores for sharing their beautiful guest cottage out there, which is just, it should be woods since you're in the woods, right? but anyway, it is a astounding place that you have there. Thank you for sharing that. And so, thank you.
Thank you, John. So really quickly, just also know that as part of the grant, John and I are going to get to keep having conversations now, and I'll be able to look to him as a consultant with some things. What we're going to do next week is we're going to kind of pick up this conversation a little bit. You're going to have had a week to think about some of these things. I want to keep that conversation going. And then I'm also going to bring in the next step on those adverse childhood experiences stuff that we started talking about. It's actually an interesting coming together. So we'll kind of finish up on that discussion. So that's next week. We need all the tables left up and just 30 chairs, so if you can do that. Again, let's thank John, and God bless you.